Check the description for the following discount codes.
I know this wheel's been out a little while, but I've only just got around to sort of buying one in for review. So there are already some reviews out there, but also I know a lot of people appreciate my honest reviews, and so we're gonna do one, because this Thrustmaster really is the only alternative on a spec level to a Logitech G920, G29 or G923. The G923 is basically just a G920 or G29 with a couple of additional features that, in my opinion, don't really make enough of a difference to warrant upgrading if you've already got the G920 or the G29, or paying the extra money over one of those other wheels. So, but this is what this T248 is going to be. Did I say 248? 428? Where's the model number gone? 248, yeah, it is a 248. Yeah, that's what this T248 really is competing with. Sort of the entry mid-level, I would say, because there are, this replaces the T150. There are some very cheap wheels out there that are much more like toys. But this and the Logitech does at least have force feedback. Now, there's going to be a lot of comparisons throughout this review between this and the Logitech, and that would make sense, because if this is in your price bracket of 300 notes, your closest alternative is going to be one of the Logitech wheels, or the T300 from Thrustmaster, which is only £70 more, and we'll talk about that a bit later as well. So firstly, and most importantly, I want to talk about the driving experience, because that ultimately is what really matters. This feels pretty much the same as the Logitech G920, both in torque, in smoothness or lack of, and in just overall performance. One of the things I noticed going from a direct drive wheel, which is what I would daily drive, just something like this, is that tiny bit of delay that you get where the lash in the gears are taken up and the play or lash in the belt is just taken up as well. It's almost like it's dampened, you might say. And it's weird, because if you've only ever used a belt or gear driven wheel in the past and not gone to direct drive, it's absolutely fine and you won't notice it. But going back to one of these, I do notice that slight, sort of very fractional delay or dampening that's applied by having cogs with clearances and belts as well. Now, this is a hybrid drive system, so unlike the Logitech, this employs cogs and a belt. But the reality of that is it doesn't feel any smoother than a Logitech, at least not in my opinion. When I was thrashing on this in Dirt Rally, in fact I'll put some footage up of me doing that now, if I be quiet and just turn the wheel, any Logitech owners will be familiar with that sound. That is a sound of gears, sort of intersecting with one another and moving. So not only does it sound just like a Logitech bass, it feels just like the Logitech gear-driven bass as well. It isn't any smoother in spite of having an additional belt in here, which is interesting because the other Thrustmaster wheels, the T300, TSPC Racer, etc., they have a belt. It's primarily a belt, but that belt comes off of a cog as well. But they do feel much smoother than what this does. Now, obviously, I haven't opened this up. I haven't actually looked at a teardown online either. But there must be a considerable portion of the way this works using, gears, perhaps plastic gears, I would assume, possibly metal, but probably plastic. So you can really feel that it isn't very smooth at all, just like the Logitech isn't. But it's entry level, it's kind of to be expected. Now, other things you get with entry level are the overall build quality and the materials used. This is all plastic, and the wheel, it's 28 centimeters wide. It feels very plasticky. I'll just give you a close-up. You can see all the different buttons on there. There's a nice little LCD display at the top, gears, RPM, speed. You can adjust some options there as well. So that's quite a nice touch. But it feels very, very plasticky. It feels very cheap. Again, the Logitech G920 is leather with metal paddles and just feels that bit nicer, in my opinion, to use. Speaking of the paddles, I think they could do with just being a touch bigger, just protruding a little bit. I like the way they feel. The paddles feel good to use. They're very tactile and very positive in operation. I just like them a touch bigger, but that will depend on your hand size, obviously. All the other buttons, they feel perfectly fine. They neither feel cheap nor high end. So that's all fine. There's no issue there. But the actual wheel itself, that does really feel cheap. You know, more almost like it should be a lower price point really for the way the wheel itself feels. And the wheel itself is, of course, what you spend your time holding and feeling. So it would have been nice if they'd done at least, you know, like what Logitech have and used leather on the steering wheel itself, you know, and perhaps a metal plate or something there. But they haven't, so it is what it is. The rest of the base is also all plastic, like right down to the actual bottom where it sort of bolts down. You've got two fixing points here that you can put bolts through, which is what I use to mount it to my GT Amiga Titan. You've then got your power USB pedal port and a shifter input under there, and there's some sort of cable tidy slots here that you can feed the cables through, and an integrated Velcro strap to be able to keep those all tidy as well. And what you see there is where the table clamp bolts in, which is this, very similar to all the other Thrustmaster table clamps. This just goes up through the hole and you do it up. And that works again just as well as all the other Thrustmaster table clamps. Perfectly fine for the sort of torque this wheel is putting out. In fact, there's a USB-C cable, not particularly interesting, but I'll show you it for completeness, and the power supply as well. Now, I wonder what power this is putting out. Output power, 2.5 amps, 48 watt. I'm trying to think what the Logitech one is, and I can't remember off the top of my head, but that's what this one is, should anyone be interested. Feels quite small and light, actually. In fact, this feels very light. When the box arrived, ironically from box.co.uk, I picked it up and I was like, well, this really doesn't weigh a lot, which is never a good sign. And it really doesn't weigh a lot. It's a very light piece of equipment. So yeah, that was a power supply. And of course I got a UK plug because I'm in the UK. You also get a different spring that you can put in the brake pedal. We'll look at the pedals in a minute, the T3PMs, and a little Allen key as well. I think that's pretty much everything we got in the box. Yeah, it was. So yeah, build quality wise, feels very cheap, feels very entry level, doesn't quite feel as nice as the Logitech. But performance wise, I'm going to say it performs pretty much identically as far as the force feedback strength, the detail and the speed at which it responds to what's going on in the sim. If it weren't for the fact that I could feel the wheel was different, if I closed my eyes, I could have been using a Logitech G920. So for those of you that have got a G920 or have used one of the Logitech wheels, this is what you're getting, it's what it's going to feel like. Very, very similar. Which again is fine, you know, for like an entry level wheel, if the price is right. And this is really where it's going to trip over itself because it's quite expensive. So that's the wheel and the wheel base. That's the other thing. This wheel doesn't come off. There's no quick release or anything like that. It is fixed onto it. And I'll talk about why that's like an interesting point a bit later as well. But I'll have a quick goosey at the pedals now. These are basically just like cheaper versions of the TLCM load cell pedals. So we've got plastic like pedal arms instead of metal ones. The base is probably exactly the same because the base was plastic or is plastic on the TLCMs, but they put like an aluminium plate here for your heels, and they put like a weight in the front to make it feel heavier. Whereas these ones don't have any of that. The pedal faces look the same as well, but as you can see, the back is all plastic. Everything here is plastic. There's almost like a 3D printed quality to these sort of pedal arms there. Just not the best finish. But then in fairness, the finish on the metal ones for the TLCM wasn't great either. The spring mechanism here, as I say, you can swap that out and you can play around with removing the preload spacer and what have you that's on the back there to get them how you want it to feel. Weirdly, this was more fiddly to do on here than it was on the TLCMs. It just feels really awkward. the other thing about these pedals, I did a comparison between the TLCMs and the Fanatic CSL pedals, and one of the things I observed is that these pedals feel very much like you are just compressing a coil spring. They're very springy, twangy might be a good way to describe them, whereas the springs used on the Fanatic pedals were at the base of each pedal and like a rotational spring, which gave a much smoother feel in operation and felt much more realistic. So these pedals have that same springiness, sort of wanting to twang back underfoot, which I really don't like. And again, the Logitech ones, they don't feel like this. They feel smoother. And I guess the other thing, talking about Logitech, this brake pedal isn't progressive in any way. It's just a linear spring. So, I mean, in fairness, I was quite surprised how quickly I got used to braking with no load cell and a huge amount of travel and a springy spring. You soon get used to it. But again, comparing it to what you might be looking at, which is the Logitech alternative, the Logitech brake pedal is much, much nicer because it has that progression to it. And it doesn't feel springy like these pedals do here. The clutch, of course, is linear as well. You know, they're just on a spring. There's nothing exciting about them. Accelerator pedal works fine. That's, you know, the easiest thing for any sim manufacturer to do half a decent job of. So they're not great pedals. Again, if the price was right, you really wouldn't care. But this whole package was 300 notes, which is, in my opinion, too high. And we'll talk about exactly why in a minute. But that's the pedals. They do work just fine. They are entry-level pedals. Set your expectations accordingly should you choose to buy these. But I mean, that really is all there is to say about the pedals. There's 4 M6 holes in the bottom there to bolt it down. That's the other thing. There's no like carpet gripper or anything on this either. You've got a couple of rubber feet dotted around, but aside from that, there wouldn't be anything to properly grip into carpet like we see with some other entry-level pedals. So yeah, that's really all there is to say about these. They're all plastic apart from the faces. The springs are very springy. Everything is linear. I'm not a huge fan of them. I think the Logitech ones are a nicer set of pedals to use at this price point. Now, let's talk about price point, because this is where things really start to trip over themselves a little bit. So this is all 300 quid. It doesn't come with a shifter, by the way. So just the steering wheel, base, and the pedals. Thrustmaster themselves then sell the T300 RS for another £69.98. That is a much smoother and more powerful belt-driven wheel, and it has a quick release, so you can buy about 5-6 different steering wheels, swap them in and out from F1 to rally to whatever you want. That is a big selling point for an extra £69. Interchangeable wheels, stronger and smoother force feedback, and overall a better quality wheelbase. If you had £300, I see no reason why to not save up another £69 and buy the T300 RS. It's just better in every way. So that's a problem straight away. Then if we ignore spending more money and look at stuff that's a little bit cheaper, you can look at the Logitech G923. That's just shy of £300, but I don't recommend the Logitech G923. I don't think that's good value for money because it doesn't really offer you anything over and above the G920, except for a few additional effects, which are just not tactile effects. They're nice to have, but they're not worth the extra money. So if we then look at a G920 without a shifter, because that would be like for like comparison, currently on Amazon, you can buy a G920 for £169.99, literally delivered to your door. That is almost half price. In fact, I'll stick a link to that in the description, as well as a link to this, should you just want to buy one of these because maybe you love Thrustmaster, or maybe you've got one of their shifters, you're already in the ecosystem. I don't know. There's not really many reasons to buy one, to be honest, over the Logitech alternative, but some people might want to. And I've got to get rid of this. I paid 300 notes for this, so I have to try and get rid of this on Facebook Marketplace after saying people shouldn't buy it, they should buy a Logitech. But it's just the way it goes sometimes. Yeah, £169.99 for the Logitech equivalent to what we have here, which has a leather wheel, metal steering wheel centre, a much nicer brake pedal, and overall is just way better value at almost half price. If you wanted the G920 with a shifter, even that is only £219, £220. So you're still £80 cheaper, and you have the nicer steering wheel, the nicer pedals, and it comes with a shifter. So in my opinion, for this to be something I could recommend people should buy on value, it needs to be at least, you know, £100 cheaper, if not a little bit more. I don't know how long the Logitech G920 will stay at that price of 170 notes. It might just be a, you know, a temporary deal. But this needs to just be much, much cheaper. It performs fine. Like I say, in use, it feels just like I'm using a Logitech G920. So I have no complaints with that. You know, as an entry-level wheel, that sort of performance is absolutely fine. It's just for £300, you could almost buy two Logitech G920s, one for you and one for your mate, and race each other. Or spend another 70 notes and get yourself a Thrustmaster T300 RS, which is just a level up completely, much smoother, much more powerful, interchangeable wheels, metal construction. There's just no, it's just, I don't know, they've just priced it really weirdly. And in case anyone wondered, the pedals, they're not potentiometer like the Logitech ones. These are Hall effect sensors, but that's not really something that makes too much of a difference from a selling point, because the potentiometer-based Logitech ones, they've been in use for over 10 years. You know, people are still using those. I mean, ones that are actually 10 years old. You know, I have heard of people that have to give them a little clean every now and then. But, you know, for most of us that might only have stuff for a few years, the potentiometers in the Logitech are not known for their failure or anything like that. So whilst these do have Hall effect sensors, you know, and in theory will have a much longer lifespan, the pedals themselves just aren't as nice. You know, really it's the brake pedal. They could have at least had some sort of progressive feel to it, you know. Both Fnatic with their CSL pedals, not the low cell ones, and Logitech with their G-series pedals, both have progressive foam or rubber inserts that just make it harden up as you get sort of 2/3 of the way down the travel. It's not a difficult thing to do, but they just haven't done it. But you know, there we go. That is where we're at, really. The wheel performs perfectly well for a entry-level force feedback wheel. I don't mind its appearance. I think it looks reasonably nice if you like the styling, but it feels cheap, it feels plasticky, because it is. Same goes for the pedals, but overall the price is just far too strong. So that is my review of the Thrustmaster T248, not 42T8 or 842T or anything else I wanted to say earlier. Decent enough entry-level wheel, far too much money. But I will stick a link in the description should you just want to get one. There will also be links to the Logitech G920, because that seems to be 170 notes delivered. That is a really good deal right now. Anyway, as always, thank you very much for watching, and take it easy.